Today is Friday again, and if it's Friday, it's time for me to blather. So I will pick up with where I was last week. I was in the middle of a book chapter that I had written several years ago and discovered saved on my hard drive. And that's what I'm doing as I'm cleaning out the contents of my consciousness. I'm increasingly looking at things that I've saved over the years for God knows what reason. And now I have a reason. This is a good reason. I have some place to present them. So I was reading a chapter of a book I had written several years ago. I don't even know if the book ever got published, but it was a book that was being sponsored by people connected with the men's consciousness movement. And my chapter was on helping men at midlife. And I had given some conceptual thoughts about the topic first, and then one case illustration, and the chapter closes with a second case. So that's what I'm going to present now. I'll present the second case. Maybe I'll mute, ask you guys to unmute then, or maybe I'll just go on. I'll see where I am after I finish the second case. This is the case of David. David is in his late 40s. He showed up in my office one day because, and this is not at all clear, he either confessed to his wife or had been found out by his wife as having had intermittent recourse to prostitutes over the past several decades. He entered couples therapy with a colleague in order to make an effort to repair the rupture that the revelation of his quote secret unquote had caused. Upon that therapist's recommendation, he also agreed to enter therapy with me to quote work on his personal issues. David stayed with me for just a few visits, only until the immediate crisis brought about by the uncovering of the truth of his life had subsided somewhat, and the couple had made the decision to continue to try to affirm their lives together rather than separately. They continued in couples therapy, and I heard fragments of information about David periodically from my colleague who continued to treat both of them and sometimes the entire family. But I stopped paying much attention to David for most of the past year. About 2 months ago, David made a decision to return to individual treatment. Now we are just beginning what I hope will be some meaningful work for him. He is hurting badly, both physically and psychologically. By way of background, David grew up in an upper middle class East Coast Jewish family. His father was a very stern, hard driving man who valued success above all things and made an affluent life for his family. David's mother was irritable, critical, and picky towards her children, and very self effacing in her relations with her husband. I believe she did not really care for her husband that much and probably would have preferred that her son be her companion rather than the man to whom she was married. Both parents, for their own reasons, needed David to be a golden child. Unfortunately, they attempted to shape his becoming their stellar offspring not by enjoying and sustaining his growing competency, but by intrusively monitoring his every move and inflicting scorn and criticism on any deviation from that to which they wanted him to dedicate himself. There was never any question that David was to be a shining light in academic accomplishment, that he would go on to a fine Ivy League school, that he would secure a graduate education, that he would make a career of great affluence, that he would marry, and that he would present his parents with grandchildren. David grimly accomplished the project with great determination and effectiveness. He did indeed graduate with high honors from an Ivy League college. He then went to the Wharton School of Finance for his graduate education. After serving an apprenticeship for a while in a multinational corporation, he found his way to Wall Street, worked his way up in the bond department, and eventually was transferred to a high-level post in the West Coast office of the firm. At the time I originally met David, his annual income, including commissions and bonuses, was $1.2 million. He also had indeed acquired his wife and his two male children, who were enrolled in prestigious private elementary school. He lived in a wonderful house, and he was in the process of building an even grander residence that would be a family pleasure palace for years to come, at least until his children would emancipate themselves. From all external trappings, he was a man who should be the object of universal envy. He had wealth, power, and indulgences at a level that exceeded that of 99.9999% of the Earth's population. And he was miserable. Only oral sex with prostitutes brought him an occasional few moments of inner peace. But David would feel degraded after these episodes and would be consumed with guilt. In addition, he had been suffering for years with chronic, intractable back pain, for which he had recently had to undergo surgery. And he had let his physical condition deteriorate, carrying too many excess pounds on his frame and suffering partly as a consequence from borderline diabetes. As a parent and as a husband, David tended to recapitulate his parents' style of interacting with his wife and children, being irritable and expressing endless criticism and disappointment. This style had soured his relationship with his wife and had produced children who tended to be sullen, lacking in self esteem, and the older one of whom could be quite lumpish and unpleasant. If all of these miseries were not bad enough, it was apparent to me almost from the start that David was an as if person. He was a Stepford man. He did not experience himself. Instead, he emitted the attitudes and platitudes that persons of his social class and ethnic background have been taught to emit as the correct ones. The switches that control the connections between intellect, soul, heart, and gonads got disconnected early in David's childhood. And at the moment, I did not know how to locate them or how to turn them on again. I did not know who he is. His wife complains that she does not know who he is. He himself clearly does not know who he is. I may have a chance, though, to affect David. Fate has been kind to him, although I do not know if he can appreciate the kindness. The market crash of 2 years ago and the collapse of the junk bond market last year have just resulted in David's losing his job. For the first time in his life, he is at loose ends, sitting on $8 million of net worth and worrying about what the purposes of his existence might be. The freedom is terrifying to him. His back is not healing as it should from the surgery. It continues to hurt. His wife is unhappy that he is at home so much, for he's been intensifying his attempts to control her and to meddle in his son's life. I am trying, perhaps futilely, to get David to see the blessing he's been handed by the loss of his career, the enormous opportunity to ask himself what his experience is really about, free from the economic necessity for doing any particular thing. I want to keep the ambiguity alive. I want to keep him from fixing himself into his rigidities too quickly once again. I hope beyond mad hope that the small voice of his lost self might at last be heard in the interstices of the wreckage of his past life. In the transference, I want to be the kind parent, the mentor he has never had. I will not criticize. I will support. I will encourage. I will appreciate any seminal buds of courage, of sensitivity, of empathy, of exploration, of aesthetic sensibility, of social interest that he might evidence if he can ever begin to feel himself all the lost parts of his hidden yearnings. My task seems horrible to me. David cannot stand what he experiences as the nothingness of his current days. He is frantically attempting to recreate the sterility of his previous adaptation. As soon as he knew he would be losing his position, he assigned himself another trivial challenge. It became hugely important to him to be accepted into membership in the finest country club in the area, one where all the important and significant entrepreneurs, politicians, and so called philanthropists congregate to get away from their wives. He wanted to hang out there. He wanted to play a lot of golf. He wooed the board of directors of the club with an intensity of purpose and succeeded in his quest. But his aching back so far prevents him from making much use of the prize. Since coming out into emptiness, he also now sets up endless lunches, talking to his former brokerage clients about his businesses, seeking a new involvement, seeking more of the old familiar, wanting an entrepreneurial challenge. He reminds me of a cellist who has learned to play a certain tune on one string of his instrument. The maestro has forbidden him from continuing to play that tune. Instead of taking the time to explore the richness that might be available to him, the harmonies, dissonances, and counterpoints he might create by using all four strings, he searches for a new simple tune he can instead play on the very same familiar string. David and I are early in our work together. I am not yet certain what I need to do to help him through this time of turbulence and whether I can even bond with him. Just as I did in the case of my treatment notions for William, I also want to use the conceptual map I earlier provided to you, my readers, to identify at the very least where I think the work I want to do with David needs to go forward. It is clear to me now, as I hope it may be to you, that David has failed to find a useful outcome to the struggle between generativity and stagnation. He is in trouble in his present developmental era because he has not successfully resolved the two preceding challenges: role flexibility versus role rigidity, and social relatedness, in the sense of having some concern with making the world a little better than he had found it for his fellow humans versus social isolation. In addition, the underlying childhood conflict, industry versus inferiority, was also never resolved in any sustaining fashion. Having been subjected to constant disconfirmation in his formative years, his shadow self feels stigmatized and inadequate, and he has buried his profound sense of shame in himself beneath his drivenness and the magnificence of his acquisition of affluence. In addition to his historic fear of his mother's longing to live through and with him, and his avoidance of the triumph of Oedipus, that lead him now to avoid trusting his soul to his wife mother, I think his recourse to prostitutes for solace also speaks to the matter of his personal sense of degradation. As we work together, I will, of course, in the fashion I specified earlier, turn my attention to these childhood matters first. David needs to achieve some emotional understanding of his underlying feelings of poor self esteem and both the symbiotic and sexualized nature of his bond with his mother. He needs to review the gender role rigidity beaten into him by his father and how he replays the part with his own sons. After some progress has been made, I will then try to move to expand his role flexibility and his sense of involvement in the mysteries of the human experience, the unresolved themes of the prior two stages that currently deplete his adaptive energies. Finally, I hope to help him to identify a true vocation for his years of maturity, one that nourishes aspirations he does not even acknowledge. And if I can, I will help him to find disciples that he can lead. Let me close by noting that David's life is an incredible success. He has mastered the core project of our culture, the acquisition of wealth and power, better than most anyone. At moments, I envy him with an intensity that startles and dismays me, for I too am a member of this culture. Why the hell can I not possess his net worth and his influence? At other moments, I grind my teeth and grumble to myself that I would do anything to be in his place. Yes, I would. I would do anything to be in his place. Anything, that is, except surrender my own sensibilities and my soul. In the final analysis, the price for him and would be for me would be simply too great. All right. Thank you. I don't know if either of you want to say anything about this piece I have finished. You can unmute yourself for a few moments and I will either listen to you or go on to something else. But I am finished with that. Anybody want to say anything?
This is the treatment that's still unfinished, Arthur?
It was at the time I wrote it.
Okay. And now?
Now he found something to do with his life. He is the person I wrote about, and I think I presented earlier. He has taken up a cause where he goes to ghettos and he goes into business with people in the ghettos and he uses his entrepreneurial skills to create businesses for the disadvantaged where they can own them and run them. So I was
Is
very successful in getting him to change course.
and is this his repentance?
Is this his repentance? No, I don't know if it's his repentance. He just moved on. He began to have a sense of social interest and a sense of wanting to do something for the greater culture beyond his own family and beyond his parents, who he takes care of very well also, and to give back into the world something of the benefits he received through his own efforts. He became a decent human being, and he started to lose interest in the prostitutes and begin to explore the possibility of being with his wife. It took 2 years of treatment. He's in another episode here somewhere that I presented earlier. I was only in my early in my work with him when I was writing this chapter, but the fullness of the work is presented elsewhere. Anything else at the moment, or we're going to go on to an entirely different topic if we are finished with this one? I see heads nodding. Okay, so mute yourselves again. Uh, this is quite a topic. It's some things I wrote about relating to clients when you may be dying. I, I'm going to pay a moment's homage to my very irritating, very toxic, and very disappointing sister. One of the things I did with her over and over again as she got older and began to be a real pain in the ass and difficult person to be with is I would tell her over and over again, since she was 7 years older than I am, I need to learn from her. I even need to learn about her grumpiness and her despair and everything else, because she was ahead of me on the trail towards death. And so I was going to just show up and talk to her, and I would be a container for whatever she needed to tell me about, even if it was ugly, hurtful, and disappointing, because she was getting ready to die in her own way. And I was getting an education for her about what the latter portions of the trail were about. So here I am. I'm about to do the same thing. Uh, During the after the turn of the century, starting in 2004, I've had two very close brushes with death. So I want to talk about what that trail is like, in the hopes that what I'm about to say will be of some use to my colleagues because they may be still actively working with clients. And what happens if suddenly you can't do the work because you may be dying and you have to go through God knows what? And what do you say to your clients and how do you take care of them? And so I'm going to pass on whatever I seem to have learned from those two brushes with death. Here we go. I posted them on the Los Angeles County Psychological Association listserv, and as I predicted, nobody responded. So I'll put it out there in the universe again. And I'm expecting maybe one person who's following me may respond in some way. But at least the two of my colleagues who are listening to me will be forced to listen again. Here we go. So it's titled Relating to Clients When You May Be Dying. Depending on one's way of looking at things, I have either lived a cursed or a magically blessed life. On 6 different occasions over my lifespan to date, I have been physically afflicted with a more than serious ailment that has threatened to kill me, and I was thereby forced to lie helplessly in the misery of my affliction, not knowing if I would or would not survive. The first was in infancy. The next 2 episodes took place during my elementary school years. The fourth was in my first year of graduate school. The fifth was in 2004. And the latest, very recent, 15 days ago. I wrote this after my 2020 encounter. Somehow, though, I have not yet been fated to depart struggling with each of these times. Well, I have not been faced to depart. Struggling with each of these times, I somehow made my way back into the flow of life. What is important for the purposes of this piece is that in the fifth and sixth episodes of near death in my life, these took place while I was actively and fully pursuing my career as a psychologist. I had and still have many clients. Both in 2004 and now in 2020, horrible circumstances compelled me to ask myself, what was I to tell my clients about my plight? And what was I to do with them as I was collapsing into the embrace of extreme danger? What, if any, was to be my relationship with them as I became unable to carry out the usual meetings, conversations, transactions that characterized our relationship? Back then, the very nature of my 2004 challenge set its own, and I thought useful constraints on what my responses to my clients was going to be. That year, death awaited because I was afflicted with multiple myeloma, bone marrow cancer. My oncologist did not sugarcoat anything. They predicted that I might have about 3 years of more longevity if I got the right care. The quote treatment unquote quote consisted of starting on an oral form of chemotherapy for about 6 months. If it was successful, that oral form of chemotherapy could get me ready for a bone marrow transplant. My cancerous marrow would then be killed with one huge chemo dose, and immediately following that stress, my own stem cells that would be harvested early on would now be infused back into me. Thus, from my stem cells, I could grow an entire new marrow and immune system, one free of cancer. And because of vulnerability to infection, while I was temporarily going to have no immune system at all, I would have to remain hospitalized, in isolation, and in a carefully filtered and regulated room for at least 6 weeks. I decided after receiving the diagnosis not to say anything and to keep from my clients, for the time being, the secret about my diagnosis and challenge. During those months of light chemo preparation, I would avoid the topic because I could carry on all my usual duties and simply remain focused on the here and now in my sessions with them. This was a period of months when I could still be at home and go about my ordinary life. But when it was time to go into the hospital for the transplant, though, I was going to have to withdraw from my clients' lives. I then decided that I would have to tell them more of the truth, that I had cancer. I tried as I started to confess that to them as I was about to go off to the hospital. I tried to be reassuring. I said that it was a kind of cancer that was treatable, and the expectation was that I would be able to rejoin my life after about 6 weeks of treatment that I was now about to receive. During the coming time, though, I had to be quarantined and kept in isolation. But even in isolation, I would have my cell phone with me. I thought that my worst problem for the weeks ahead could be boredom. So if any of my clients wanted a phone consultation while I was hospitalized, I believed I would be able to pay reasonable attention to their desire. I could continue to bear witness to the unfolding of their lives and still go on contributing via telephone, whatever they were used to receiving from me, if they so wanted. In this, I was attempting to maintain, quote, usual boundaries, unquote, quote, which I then believed those years ago constituted the core of being true to some kind of necessary ethical and technical responsibility on my part towards my clients. If readers are curious about how my decisions played out during my cancer treatment, at the time of my needing to enter the hospital, one of my clients was confronting serious and challenging life disruptions. So he and I agreed and proceeded to hold 2 regular telephone sessions a week with each other while I was in isolation. And while I was so incarcerated, 7 other of my clients called me at least once during those 6 weeks. The phone calls, however, did not necessarily feel as if significant ordinary therapeutic work needed to go on. On the contrary, the calls often felt as though I was being tested. The conversation was designed more for the client's reassurance that I was, in fact, alive, that I had energy, that I was not feeble and close to death's door, and that I could transcend my own challenges and be present, even if only by phone, and I could still make them and not me the center of my concern and attention. I made the transition out of cancer and into wellness as had been anticipated. Fate spared me from being forced to struggle with what to do when my remission would break down a few years later. The cancer would reassert itself, and I would have to begin discussing my dying with my clients. Quite the contrary. By the end of my treatment, I had gone into complete remission. My clients and I resumed our ordinary and special relatedness, and that kept running its ordinary and lovely course. You see, that was 16 years ago. Today it's 19 years ago, and I have beaten all odds. No multiple myeloma has ever recurred. I continue to remain cancer free, and I have not had to have any conversations with my clients about the fact that I now had to embrace what was going to be a slide into incapacity and death. The structure of my collapse early this month, though, in contrast to my having to contend with cancer earlier, did not by its very nature offer any clarity or any constraints about how or how not to reveal and discuss my plight with clients. I had no forewarning nor any conceptual handle for managing what was happening to me. For some weeks, I had been going through what I experienced as a complex set of slowly increasing difficulties in living my life. I had begun to feel more apathetic. I was losing interest in eating. I tired more easily and would start puffing when I climbed stairs. I had been used to walking a mile or two with no effort. Now a block made me want to get in bed. I always had some urinary urgency, but now I was awakening 6 or 7 times every night. And this constantly interrupted sleep, too, was contributing to my fatigue. The key trigger of my concern, though, was my blood pressure. It seemed to be going up and then going up even more, putting me at risk of heart attack or stroke. I asked my internist for a referral to a cardiologist. I liked her immediately. She began trials with a variety of heart meds at various dosages. Nothing helped. I took my blood pressure numbers twice a day, and no matter what we tried, the pressure continued to creep upward. All the while, I lived my ordinary life as best I could. After 2 weeks, the cardiologist decided she needed to order a full panel of blood work and tests. She called me late in the day when the results were in and told me to drop everything and check myself into the local hospital's ER immediately. My symptoms were the result of complex and serious systems failures that needed immediate attention if my life were to be saved. I certainly did as I was told. I took my computer and cell phone with me. During the night, when I was in the ER, much more blood was drawn for testing. Many ultrasounds and atomic isotope scans were done to various parts of my body. By the wee hours, a narrative began to emerge about what was troubling me. It was quite frightening. It seems like most aging males, I had an enlarged prostate. However, mine is some bigger than most. What had caused terrible dysfunction of essentially needed organ systems was that over many months or years, my prostate had crowded and interfered with the proper functioning of my bladder. The bladder, in turn, could not fully void. Instead, it grew larger and larger to contain that which was not being voided. The bladder kept collecting more and more rancid urine which was then backed up ever higher in my body, out of the bladder and engorging the ureters, and eventually even forcing its way back into my kidneys. My kidneys were being damaged and going into kidney failure from their being poisoned in that fashion. My non functioning kidneys and were not what was needed by the heart in order for the heart to be properly regulated. And the kidney failure was the root of my racing hypertension. During admission, the admitting physicians asked me if I had a do not resuscitate power of attorney, and if my kidneys had been permanently damaged, was I willing to go on constant dialysis or would I rather die? I was certainly beginning to think a lot about whether death was to be my destination. I did not like asking if I had a do not resuscitate power of attorney. This is a side I didn't write about. The physician told me the hospital's policy was if, even with a do not resuscitate order, if my heart stopped, was I willing to have it started again? And if I meant do not continue to keep me alive if I'm in a vegetative state, was that what I meant? I said yes. And that's when he asked, all right, we may be able to restore you if your heart fails, but if we're going to restore you, you're going to need dialysis for the rest of your life. Do you want us to let you die? And that's when I said no. If I could have dialysis, I would stay alive because I figure I could at least do some things that were interesting and constructive, even if I had to be on dialysis several times a week. As morning came, I knew I had 6 clients to cancel for the day ahead. What on earth was I going to say to them? I had no idea whether or not I would live. If I did live, I had no idea when or whether I might be able to resume the work we had been doing together. And then there were days worth of clients scheduled for days ahead of that one. 2 new clients were waiting to hear from me. And even how long I would be hospitalized was totally unknowable. It depended on how much resiliency and capacity for recovery was left to my 88-year-old body. My own way of working had evolved steadily ever since I had to manage the dilemma of relating to clients in the face of cancer treatment 16 years ago. This month, I was adrift in much greater ambiguity. If there were no obvious constraints flowing from the nature of my present illness itself, on what might I or might not do with clients while I attempted to return to health? And I did not know what treatments I would receive, nor how I would respond to them. And I was now not the same psychologist I was when I faced death for cancer. I was now living in the embrace of changing principles of the nature of psychological work that had resulted from my decades of evolution in my consciousness and now had become deeply held by me. These included the working alliance between therapist and client is the most powerful force in whether or not the efforts we make will lead to good outcomes. That working allowance is co-created by the two participants and grows out of a mutual interaction in which each party is affected by the other. It is rooted in mutual respect, appreciation, and caring. As Carl Rogers once wrote, the participants prize one another. Some kinds of therapist self-disclosure at useful moments can enhance the working allowance. Rigid boundary setting can diminish the working allowance. Boundary crossings are not necessarily boundary violations and at times can be quite facilitating. Therapy is best when it is a shared experience between co-equals who are not in a dominant deferent relationship. The nature of the work addressed and the work itself needs to shift and alter as life flows and continues to evolve for one, the other, or both of the parties. When the working alliance is effective, both parties are likely to be pulled into change, whether it has been sought or not, as a result of participating freely and authentically in this very special, non structured encounter. Because I have embraced these principles as important organizers of how I conduct my encounters with clients, I therefore made the following decisions about how I might best support my relationships with my clients during the time of my collapse and frightening uncertainties about my future. I must, of course, not just disappear. I had to keep canceling those I could not see in an organized fashion. And if I could, give those affected 48 hours advance warning of my absence to come. I would tell my clients the truth about what was wrong with me, the risk to my life, and what was being done to bring me back to life, and hopefully back to the ability to leave the hospital and resume my ordinary life rituals. As I put this into motion, it was as if I started to create a newsletter that was revised every few days and was now sent out to a listserv I created of friends, relatives, colleagues, and yes, clients. The story of my journey in the hospital. If clients asked if they could visit me, I answered in the affirmative. I did not put a boundary in place. The hospital had very liberal visitation policies. I could have as many visitors as I wanted at whatever hours I desired. In response to my affirmative welcome, about a third of my regular clients did in fact come to see me at least once during my days in the hospital. Their visits often involved serious boundary crossing. I did not attempt to segregate them. At the time when any particular client came, I sometimes had another visitor in residence, my wife, some other relative, some friend or friends, some colleague, and yes, sometimes other clients at the same time. Now, as I overcome my damage, have left the hospital and have been slipping back into a more ordinary work with my clients, I am looking forward to having conversations about how mixing into my real life was experienced by them, and what clients who had this kind of experience to other parts of my life took away from their visits. The ability of clients who so wanted to visit seemed to provide certain benefits for those who did so. For some, they found reassurance in the hope or energy I kept radiating, even at dark times. It reassured them that I probably was not just going to go off into nothingness. For another subset, it nourished them to be able to do something that might comfort me, make my life a little lighter, and enhance the sense of our relationship was one of shared caring. They were now not just persons for whom I cared, but themselves could give me some meaningful care. Some clients brought or sent me flowers, cards, or other presents. I accepted these with enthusiasm and gratitude. Some clients just wanted to maintain an irregular written relationship with me, wanting to check in periodically or wanting to share with me their comments on the musings I had been posting about my journey back towards health. I remember spending a lot of time texting or emailing back to clients in the face of what they had been forwarding to me. While I was in the depth of my most recent illness, a few of my clients were in serious distress about their own issues, and I tried as best I could to transcend myself and be responsive to them. I did have 5 phone sessions over the days I was flattened, and I even had a video session with a troubled couple in Northern California who were battling cancer while I was reclining on my back in bed with my hospital gown on. Neither my own condition nor the terribly troubled emotional state of my clients involved and wanting my attention, nor the format of what I was doing, phone sessions with hospital noises in the background and an occasional interruption by hospital personnel, or video sessions subject to the same interruption, seemed to prevent us from having conversations that had a good share of compelling moments and I believe were meaningful to the clients involved. To sum up, once again, I find myself being a contrarian. As my health collapsed 3 weeks ago, I handled the threat to myself and my relationship with my clients by choosing to be transparent about my life and inviting my clients, should they so wish, to interact with me, as I was going to be interacting with others who were members of my personal life. I tore down the wall between professional and personal and defied the canons we have been taught, always to remain separate, always to remain opaque, and always to avoid involving clients in the realities of our lives. I am now out of the hospital again, and for the last 10 days have been welcoming my clients back into my office, reconnecting with a few more every day as my strength improves. An important experience from which I am now eager to learn is what has been the impact of how I have interacted with my clients during the emergency. What has been the effect on the working alliance of both the temporary rupture to the relationship brought about by my very ill health, and then what meaning and effect was there for my attempts to manage what was happening in the way I did? I have already received a text from one of my clients with a small beginning of an answer about the effect of my decisions. Thus, quote, thanks for your last notice, the last written magazine article I was sending to everybody. I just want to add that I'm very happy you are home and in recovery. You continue to be an inspiration and a role model for me. Your relentless thirst for living and your love of life is something I will always admire and strive for. I think with your help and guidance that I've been making some small steps towards inhabiting that space myself. Okay, I'm done. You can unmute yourselves. It's funny reading this now makes me laugh.
I'm glad that at 105, you'll still be working.
I assume so.
Mhm. Even if it's from a hospital bed.
Even if it's from a hospital bed, that's right. And
Think
I
about
will,
all the uninterrupted time on dialysis. You sit there and you'd have all this time to work, to call
oh
people and
yes,
recess things.
the dialysis room could be my office. Absolutely.
Yeah.
At any point in time in the course of this, Arthur, did you ever feel that your ability or capacity to provide therapy was compromised?
No, my mental processes were quite intact. I could still hear, listen, understand, think about my clients. As a matter of fact, it was a relief to be able to interact with them because it picked me up out of my own preoccupations with myself and wallowing in my own feared sense of damage. So
Yeah.
it was a good thing for me to have them available. The only real problem happened because my wife came a couple times and there were some clients in the room and there was some private conversation she wanted to have with me. And I didn't kick my clients out immediately so she could talk to me. So it made trouble in my marriage temporarily, what I was doing with my clients.
You also provided a possibility for your clients to really care for you.
Yes. Yeah, some brought me flowers. It meant something to them to express appreciation for my role in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Being in a position of mutuality rather than the traditional one down position was somehow ennobling for them.
Mhm.
So it seems that it's clear what the the secret of your longevity is.
Well, tell me, what do you take away from that? What's the secret of my longevity?
Your work with your clients.
Oh, yeah,
Not upsetting your wife too
it I don't know if that's the secret of my longevity, but I certainly believe that there are three things we need. We need some solitude, and I take some solitude for myself. We need to be meaningfully engaged with some challenges in the world where we're using our talents in some way that feels good, and we're succeeding in some ways as long as having frustrations along the path. And we need a lot of human warmth. I think our physiology functions better if those three things are in a reasonable place. I really think our bodies suffer if we're not taking that kind of care of ourselves.
Mm.
We are mind body. Oh, that's a whole other topic I'm going to get into next time. Hmm. So I hope to serve as a role model for you and other people. I don't expect you to manage any life-threatening occasions in your own life in the same way I did, but at least it's out there as a model. You don't have to hide. You can just involve your clients in whatever is going on with you. Maybe that's the best way to take care of them.
much.
I think
I'd hope I'd react that way, to be honest. I think I've always been very impressed with how you work through these things.
I think what is the ordinary wisdom of our field? I don't know if anybody talks about this very much. I think it would say, I'm going to be incapacitated for a while. I've arranged for you to be able to see Dr. So and so, who's going to
Professional backup, yeah.
yeah, he's going to be my backup while I figure out what's going to happen with my life. I don't know if that feels particularly good to clients.
And you've never been in a position where you kind of like had made a decision to close your practice.
No,
Right.
I was hoping to avoid having to close my practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I had the bone marrow cancer, I thought, oh well, at least I'll have perhaps what the rule of thumb is about 3 years to continue with my ordinary life. So I'll get ready to figure out what to do when I actually start dying. Then I'll take care of that if I become too sick to be able to go on. But at least I don't have to worry about that now. I feel okay. I'm out of the hospital. I'm in remission for at least now. Hmm. But I didn't know if I was going to come out of the hospital when my kidneys failed. My kidneys were literally in kidney failure. They were not working. And nobody knew whether they would start working again. That's scary.
Yeah.
They're working excellently again. Hmm. It was very demoralizing. What they were doing was they needed to get the excess stored urine out of me. So I was hooked up constantly to a big flush in a big bag, and they were putting tons of saline in me and flushing me out. All that was coming out was horrible, old, pussy, horrible, ugly urine, and they put me on antibiotics to kill the infection. And that went on for days and was not clarifying. And so what they wanted was to start seeing clear. The clear fluid they were putting into me coming out again, joined by urine, which meant that the kidneys were working. It took about 6 days before that started. And for 6 days, I saw nothing but horror coming out of it. Strangely, and not strange at all, it's very understandable. I came out of the hospital 20 pounds lighter than I went in. And it wasn't for lack of eating or anything. Turned out I had that much excess fluid in me, and excess fluid is heavy. And I lost 20 pounds. I've never put it back on after coming out. Wow. I had a secret resource. My wife's brother, younger brother, is a urologist, and he was very encouraging. He said he's seen the syndrome many times in his practice. Most often, even if the kidneys are not functioning, if you've caught it reasonably early enough, and I think you have, the kidneys will start functioning again if you stop them from being poisoned. And he kept telling me, too soon, it's not a crisis yet, you'll be okay. Just be optimistic and just do whatever the docs are telling you. They're doing the right thing. He was a great help to me. I talk to him at least once a day, ask, well, what are the newest numbers? What's happening? And so it'll be okay. You're still fine. You're not close to death.
Did the desire to keep working with your clients have a great motivating capacity for you?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I also have a terrible set of daydreams. I imagine that I die and my wife has to go through mourning, and seeing how devastated she is going to be is devastating to me. It's so painful. I don't want her to have to go through that. Makes me fight to stay alive.
Hmm.
I keep telling her she has to die first. And I don't want that to happen soon either. But but somehow I'll cope with it better than she will. And she said, "Oh no, you won't. I will." we have big arguments about who will be the most or least distressed when the other dies.
Hmm.
I said, let's both die from a stroke in the middle of the night one night. Hmm. So that's my report from what it looks like later on the trail. I'm sure you can hardly wait.
I've decided to not take the trail. I'm just gonna take a different direction.
You're gonna go backwards.
Yeah, I'm gonna age in reverse.
Benjamin Button.
Yeah, the strange life of Benjamin Button. That's right. Okay, so I'll do some advanced teasing. I'll tell you what I'm going to talk about next week. I probably won't get through all. Maybe I will. Where is it? Where's the document? It's in this stack somewhere. Oh, well, no, I don't know where it is. It's long. I am going to take you on a journey in public policy next week. Wow. I had such a powerful experience as I was going through my archives. I came up with the document that I, with the help of others, had created, calling on the American Psychological Association to try to recommend to the policymakers in Congress how the United States healthcare system should be changed. And my God, we did a really special job. It is a wonderful set of recommendations. I was very moved. I felt very proud that I had directly authored parts of it and that I had worked with these astonishingly wonderful colleagues that I love to do a really important task, and how bitterly disappointed I felt that we could get nowhere with what we had crafted, because you'll see, maybe you'll agree with me, it is intrinsically powerful and beautiful and would make the country so much better for everybody, for the people who are the healthcare providers, for the people who consume healthcare, and for the economy. The only people who would be disadvantaged are the damn health insurance companies and the people who manufacture pharmaceuticals. They wouldn't make as much money. But everybody else, the people who give healthcare and the people who consume healthcare, would get much better healthcare, much less meddling, interference, bureaucratic nonsense. Oh my God. You'll let me know if I'm crazy or not when I present it next week. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll tell the tale of how it came to be created and why we could get nowhere. And I am still feeling bitter. I had forgotten how wonderful it was. I just pushed the whole thing out of my mind because it had failed. But I'm glad I was forced to revisit it again. And I'll be back with you next week. Anybody have any other final words? Yes, no?
Have a good weekend.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. I intend
Stay,
to.
stay out of the hospital.
Well, no, I may be going by the hospital to get a booster shot, so I don't know if I'm
Okay,
gonna stay out of the hospital.
that's all right.
I'm gonna stay away from infirmity. How's that?
Yes,
That'll do.
That'll
Thank you.
work.
Have a good weekend yourselves.
Yeah, see ya.
okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.